Panel Just Capital, Fundraising and Investment with an Equity Lens. My name is Tracy Jarman, and I'm Chief of Staff with CAPEQ, and I'm excited to moderate today's discussion. For the next few minutes, we're going to dig into how social equity can be made a priority in an investment practice and shine light on some innovative ways that we might do justice for innovators of all communities. We are at a unique moment in history. We know that um, less than 1% of Black business owners receive venture capital. We know that the racial wealth divide is projected to reach zero by the year 2053. But we also know that Black business owners are 12 times wealthier than their peers. And so we have a unique opportunity by investing in entrepreneurs and Black business owners to close the racial wealth gap. And so as we work to be more equitable in business fundraising and investing, I've joined today by two fantastic leaders who will share a little bit about their experience navigating this new space and conversation. Each of you out here in the audience may be experiencing this moment differently, whether you're a business owner, an investor, a funder, or a representative of philanthropy. And we're all at different stages of this journey. And so we invite you to listen in and to continue the conversation even after this panel, because now is the time to re-examine all of our processes to make sure that we are creating an equitable society. So with that, I would like to introduce my colleagues, or I would like to let them introduce themselves. And if you could start by sharing your name, your organization, and why do you care about making capital just for entrepreneurs of all colors? Jennifer, would you kick us off?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer James. I am the founder of Strategy House, located in Dallas, Texas. And so my biggest motivation here is being able to educate and equip all people, but specifically these entrepreneurs and people of color, the tools and resources that they need in order to scale their existing businesses and to also to seek capital.
Thanks, Jennifer. Ben, would you introduce yourself?
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, Tracy and Jennifer, for hosting this conversation, and glad to be a part. As you said, my name is Benjamin Van. I am the founder and CEO of Impact Ventures. We are a Dallas-based nonprofit organization with a mission to empower talented yet underestimated women and communities of color to build generational wealth through inclusive entrepreneurship, community wealth building, and integrated capital. And specifically, one of the main issues that we're addressing as an organization, and I feel like our nation is not addressing more intentionally, is the wealth gap. And so I believe that using different capital structures and capital strategies can help us achieve our racial and our gender wealth divide. And so that is why I'm passionate about doing the work that I do to help close the gaps that are in our society.
Wonderful. So I'm excited to dig in from your perspectives and experience. And so for my work at CAPEQ, we're an impact and advisory investment firm that works with clients across the nation, across different sectors. And what we've been seeing is that there are so many organizations making statements about supporting Black-owned businesses. There are so many new funds, there are commitments, the whole 9 yards. And so I'm curious, what do you all make of all of this excitement and energy in this space at this moment?
I guess I'll jump in there first. I'm really excited about all of the new funds and the activity that I'm seeing kind of come into the ecosystem, really from every vantage point, from government, you see with the PPP, from the private capital and the private investment landscape and how more representation is being shown in the investment industry, all the way to philanthropic and the shift and the transformation in changing new models to get capital, align capital with impact. However, we still see that capital is not landing where it can make the most impact, which is in our most vulnerable communities. And because of this, while, representation is great and these new funds are great, we have to be mindful and careful of not using the same tools and strategies that were used to break the system. And so it's going to call for new strategies, new systems to be designed for this new majority that's going to be taking place in our country, where the minority is now becoming the majority, and we need to build new systems and new funds and new strategies that address their unique challenges. I'm particularly excited about the work we're doing with the Boston Impact Initiative, where it's a national fund building cohort that's bringing together 12 cities from across the US that are all laser focused on building these racial equity investment funds. And so it's exciting to see that we're doing it a different way, in a more intentional way that's aligning with the community we're looking to impact. And so while I think it's great to see new funds, new activity, all these headlines in the news about funds, just having representation is not enough. I think just perpetuating the systems that we have with the same strategies is not going to get us in a better place in the long run. Maybe in the short term, but in the long run, we're still going to be headed towards huge gaps in inequities that we see today.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, I think, the motivation and passion I have is being able to educate and provide the resources and tools so that our underrepresented individuals are equipped and ready to accept that capital, and in a position to be able to do that responsibly, and just really understanding what that really means, and how that, not only impacts the community, but just kind of impacts their organization and business in a positive way, if they're educated on it. And I think that's the biggest thing. We do see a lot of headlines with, there's $50 million funds and all of this great, exciting things, but how do we get to it? I don't think there's enough information around that. And then I think a lot of the criteria already eliminates 95%, of the people that's going after it. So I think it's a twofold. I think it's great that companies and organizations, and we're kind of coming together to create these funds where there's an access of funds for, underrepresented individuals can get to. But then the other part is educating these individuals in businesses on how to set this criteria, what to look for, and then how they can access it responsibly. So I agree with Ben 100%.
Yeah, so I'd love to dig a little deeper. So in terms of the systems, the processes, the criteria that you both mentioned are biased, unfair, and may immediately disqualify some of the Black-owned businesses that they're intended to support. Can you tell us a little bit more about, what makes those processes and criteria unjust from your experience and from the entrepreneurs that you work with? What does it mean that the system is unjust?
So for me, I'll go ahead and jump in. For me, as an entrepreneur, I remember there was a time where in order for me to even, get so far in the process of, getting funds, I actually had to have a Caucasian male with me at the table to kind of represent me in a sense, and to also show a little bit of control with the business. I felt like a lot of that was because maybe I was, a little bit younger. Obviously, I'm a African-American woman, some of the obvious bias that you see there, but I also felt there was also this sense of a little bit more comfortable from the people on the other side of the room with just kind of how the funds would be dispersed and just kind of what that would look like in the long term, right? And so I was actually okay with playing, I considered that game for a while, because I understood how important the perception was when you were looking for fund and asking for, funding from certain individuals. And then the other part to that for me in my experience was I've been asked to be part of companies just so they could get different types of funds, more funds that are more geared towards diversity, or maybe if there's a certain percentage of the company I have, maybe now they can, get a certain amount of funds from, X, Y, and Z, at which they would profit from it, wholeheartedly. But for me, it was almost just an asset to the business, just to kind of make it look like they check up all the boxes, right? In that way. So I've kind of seen it both ways, to be honest with you, as it relates to funds. Again, that's just kind of my experience, but I don't think that's too far-fetched with some other individuals other entrepreneurs I've been with that had to kind of do similar things.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's a ton of barriers on I see the fundraising process as on a systems level, but I think on an interpersonal level, I think that's where the most impact is made. Because there are certain biases, unconscious biases, albeit that frankly enter the room, when decision-making process is beginning, I actually heard, I had a friend who was in the banking industry, the business banking industry, and straight up told me that if a Black person were to open a chicken shack or a beauty salon, they would be more likely to underwrite a loan, because in their perception of that particular culture was that those are the only types of businesses that they could be successful at, right? And so that limits a whole entire community to be able to do things, cook chicken and do hair, and we were much more than that from a business perspective, especially now in 2020. And so there are a lot of those unconscious biases that creep in, which is why representation is important, because we understand culture, we understand community, we understand you can be a Black individual and have for the first time, I met a Black environmental attorney. And I was like, you are a unicorn, right? She's a Black woman, environmental attorney. And I was like these are the things and the stories we need to promote so that people understand that we're capable of doing other things other than just cooking food and doing service industry type things. And we know that stems from systemic issues of racism and slavery, of always kind of being the help. And when we transition that into economics, right, we see a lot of our businesses are those service-based industries. But we know if we're going to create true wealth, we have to venture into the product realm. But we know there's barriers getting into there, the barriers of entry of how much capital you need, licensing. Let's look at the cannabis industry and how it's been detrimental to our communities in terms of pipeline to prison. However, you see the legalization of cannabis and marijuana. However, to get into that industry, you need $75,000 in some states just to get licensed to be able to play in the game, right? However, we're still not, revamping our justice system and releasing those that are, in jail or in prison off the very thing that we're legalizing. So there's a ton of systemic, structural, and interpersonal barriers I think that exist. And I think, and like I said, alluding to the Boston Impact Initiative, these are cities across the U.S. that are working on this. So it's great to be able to see this type of information and this really creativity of what it takes to really move the needle in underserved communities where you can't lay blanket strategies across all communities.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that's been shared. I would just add that, just really the social capital gap, I think is really important in building the relationships on both ends for the investors and the entrepreneurs. And that's something that we're seeing is really important, and trying to bridge that and make those connections. And as a graduate of an HBCU, that's something that is near and dear to my heart as well. Also, I've heard from some entrepreneurs in my travels about the hurdles to getting credit, and how most loans are based on FICO scores, which we know do exhibit signs of bias. And because Black families do not have wealth and assets, then there are that does present a significant barrier to getting that capital. So those are just some examples of how this shows up for Black entrepreneurs who are trying to access all of the wonderful opportunities that are now available. I'd love to zoom out a little bit. Ben, you mentioned kind of a systems perspective. And so, as we think more broadly about all of the impacts of this, kind of what are you seeing from a systems perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I like to relate this to the dance. We talked about this in our pre-screening about, we always hear that famous quote that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance, right? And I think from a systems standpoint, we don't consider in that same sentence, whose party it is, what kind of party it is. Is it a ballroom dance versus the, the Tootsie Roll? What kind of party is it, right? And And a lot of times people are showing up, in t-shirts and jeans when they should be in a tuxedo, right? Because they weren't on the list, they didn't know the rules, they didn't know the unspoken code, they didn't know the language. And so when you think of the system in terms of whose party it is, who owns the capital, right? Who's making the decisions on how the capital is being dispersed? What type of party it is, you're talking about what are the rules. When you go to a more formal dance, there's certain things that you do that you wouldn't do at a normal, club party or somewhere you could go with friends. And so I like to relate it to the dance in this, the systemic level, where there are challenges from a policy standpoint that trickle down from a federal level. We look at PPP and how 90% of Black-owned businesses that apply for PPP did not get access to that capital. We already talked about social capital, but these are some of the systemic barriers that I think challenge, how we democratize capital, right? Like, how do we actually make capital more accessible, more just? And these are the things that I'm seeing, and I like to relate it to the dance. And so if we can think about, shifting not only capital, but shifting power and ownership in the distribution of capital, I think we'll see capital flow into unique spaces and various spaces where most people just can't reach, right? If I'm a heterosexual white male who has a Harvard or Ivy League background that is used to investing in renewable energies, and a Black woman comes to me with the latest hair care product, but she is literally blessing Black women all over the country with her recipe, knows nothing of that, right? Like, that is a challenge that presents itself to where he does not have access to that opportunity. And it's not that it's seen as less of a business opportunity. It's just that proximity and that relationship with that particular industry or that particular culture doesn't exist. And so it almost has a counter effect to where we feel like our ideas aren't worthy, or we feel like our ideas aren't scalable, or we feel like our ideas aren't truly business models, when we really just need to get in front of the right people that understand what it is we're trying to do.
And some criteria around the party, it's just not doable, that you're talking about, right? Or we lack the resources, or just can't flat out have it. Not that we don't want to go to the party, it's just we may not be able to afford to go to the party, or the right date to bring to the party, whatever the case may be. So I think there's a lot of other contributing factors to that. And I like how you use that analogy, because it is so true. You have to know what party you're going to, what the criteria is, and try to see if what you have kind of fits within that, or if there's a way to kind of shape it, to kind of work with the resources and what you have in order to try to execute it as best as you can.
And I think it doesn't just stop at capital from a monetary standpoint. I've been reading a lot about community capital and all the different structures of community capital, talking about cultural capital, right? That is our ability and our unique ability to, for example, when you see certain Hispanic communities and there's grocery stores that, everything is written in Spanish, like, that is culture forward innovation. We may not see that as innovation, right, but because that is a competitive advantage from a cultural standpoint that traditional investors might not see the value in. But the fact that, if you look at the continent of Africa, right, and how many different languages and cultures come from that culture, right? Like, we always say Black people are not a monolith, but that is innovation, like, that we have not tapped into in terms of telling our story, in terms of relating to our ancestors, relating to, our communities. That is a competitive advantage that we have, is our language and the various types of language that we have. The storytelling, that's something that we haven't tapped into because we've been stripped away of our heritage, our history, the very things that created, who we are. And other cultures have had access to that. And because they've had access to that, they've been able to capitalize on that. Right. Think of how the Jewish community moves when it comes to economics and business. They do business with each other. They go in on and buy bulk on products, on equipment. They practice group economics in a way that at one point in time in this country, it was illegal to do that. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, it was illegal for us to even gather on the street of 3 or more people. Like, that was considered illegal. The only place you could gather was a church. And that's why the church was kind of like the centerfold of our community, because it was the only place where Black folks could get together. So if we can't even get together and practice business together out in the open, you see how these structural barriers over time and over generations cause us to distrust, one another, cause us to not be confident in our ideas. It restricts us in the innovation and the types of products and service we can offer. And tapping back into that community capital, I think, and that cultural capital, I think is really, really it's a big thing for us. I mean, look at what Black Panther did.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The world. I mean, you talk about innovation, like, he literally made up this fictitious world, where with a natural resource called vibranium that he made up, that,
Right.
and literally we took that and we made lemonade out of lemons, right? With that, we embodied it, we took it. Imagine if that was actually our history and our something that we can actually connect and relate to in a factual historical level. We know some of the stories about Massa Musa and some of the richest men in Africa and the richest kings and in Egypt, and we know the stories that have been told. But I think those are areas in where, when we talk about capital, social capital, cultural capital, political capital, you look at Atlanta and how they've been able to transform through and through their political system, even though they're fighting the same challenges other cities are with gentrification. The fact that they had Black leadership on a political level created so many opportunities for Black entrepreneurs across the board, with the airport, everything you can think of that was built in Atlanta, there were Black folks that were in on that. And so I think looking at those little, those success stories and those success points and trying to replicate that, history has always proven itself. We've already had these strategies. We've already gone down these avenues of how to build it. We just have to continue to do it and make sure that we bring our allies to the table who do have the power and the privilege to make these things happen and show them why they're important.
Right. And real quick, and I know, Tracy, we're probably going to transition, but, one of the things that I admire so much about Tyler Perry is that he has literally not only created his own seat at the table, but has created his own party with his own criteria. It's not really the perception or the normalcy that we would see with trying to force yourself to fit in, but also just really worrying about who your audience is and your demographic and catering to that in a way to where people can't deny you capital because of the sales and just some of the the things that are generating. I come from a product world. It is very hard to get in leadership in retail world unless you're a store manager, like a boutique or like a store. But when you're talking about, VP of merchandising and a lot of these huge brands, there's only 3% of minorities in that space. And so just to quickly say, we spend as a culture $1.2 trillion a year on brands and spending. So when you think about how to, in that world for me, when you think about trying to create your own seat and what the kind of party and who to invite, and when you're looking for capital, there's so many ways you can leverage through the resources and educating yourself on demographics and markets to kind of to make it work for yourself. But I wanted to say that about Tyler Perry in particular, because sometimes you do have to kind of create your own criteria and take that risk.
He's created his own airport now, but I know we got to move on. So
yeah, absolutely.
I love this. This is great. I just like to, by way of transition, I love the party analogy. And, as I think about what are some ways to explore holding the party differently. And so two things came up to me, and I'd like to move us to talking about. So what are some actions? What are some ways that investors and funders can change this process? And for me, what's coming up is where the location of the party. Oftentimes we're in unbanked places physically. And so there are some folks out there, Travis Holloway at Solo Funds, and there's other people who are democratizing just the access. And there's places that we, as Ben mentioned, we couldn't go before. And so why would we go to certain neighborhoods in certain places? And then also what's coming up for me is, who is hosting the party? Who is in charge of that guest list? And I know that there are some efforts, one in particular called Builders and Benefactors, which is a group of Black and Brown founders and fund managers. It's a community of them who are working together to support and scale businesses and to close gaps. What are some other ways that you may have heard of folks who are changing these systems and processes?
I think there's a ton of activity going on. I think, I alluded to the Boston Impact Initiative and the different cities that are part of that. They're all launching funds. And so if there are investors and philanthropists out there that are looking for intermediaries to deploy capital, there's 12 cities, major cities that are launching funds that will allow you to do just that in unique ways that address the challenges that exist in the community. One of the things I think about is, philanthropists and impact investors and traditional investors is reassessing how they think about risk in a traditional sense. When I was working with managing the donor advised fund with Fidelity Charitable, I saw a lot, the minimum required distribution, MRD, was about 6%, per year. And when I think about, and that's on an individual level, when I think about foundations, and their requirements, the 95% that's being invested, to really think critically about that 95%, to say if your intentions and your sole purpose is to deploy capital in a way that moves impact, then we have to reassess how we're upholding and building and hoarding wealth by not tapping into that 95% that's being invested. Maybe try, you have to take some risks, maybe try an additional 5%, annually, and just see what happens from an impact standpoint. Maybe you only invest 90% of your assets and you take 10% of discretionary funds that you move out the door. Those are some things that I'm seeing. Robert Smith has his 2% AUM initiative where he's calling on philanthropists and foundations to contribute and corporations to contribute 2% of their assets specifically to move the needle with underserved communities. So those are just a few things.
Right. And for me, I've been kind of dibbling and working with organizations that have the fund and then educating organizations that really don't know a lot about this demographic in order to fund them, right? So it's kind of been a mix of both for me. And there's a lot of organizations and groups, like we said, have the titles, have the funds, but don't know where to go. They don't have the representation to guide them to the groups that need the funding and just kind of being educated on that. And so I've been taking a lot of roles in that way too, with being able to revise criteria to educate, whether it's board members or organizations, on what this looks like for minorities and the importance of it. And I think there are a lot of dollars out there that want to be spent, but it's just education on both sides. So I've kind of been doing a mix of what you and Ben are doing alongside, having some organizations holding their hand through the process as well, which has been beneficial for me as well. So those are just kind of ways that I've looked at trying to help close the gap there.
This is great. So we could go on and on, but as we move to close, I'd like to provide each of you just an opportunity to share just one parting thought and where people can find you if they would like to learn more and to stay involved in your efforts.
Right. Mine would be find joy in creating your own seat at the table. I've done that along this journey every step, boldly, confidently. And I think it's important to be comfortable with what you're trying to do and believe in yourself so much that you're willing to take that risk to do that. So just be bold in trying to create your own seat at the table and equipping yourself with the knowledge and resources and the network, the supporting network to do that. And so you can find me, again, I can be reached at jennifer@strategyhouse.com. Anytime. Please reach out if you have any questions or just kind of want to talk more about the process.
Awesome. I bounce to the similar tune. I would say my parting words would be to those out there, take risks because the world depends on it. I would say someone out there is depending on you to be the person that you're called to be. And so don't be afraid to take a risk. To do that, because as you can see in every part of our society, especially our political society right now, we need risk takers. We need people who are willing to stand on the front lines, whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to be marching in the street. It could be writing a check to one of the organizations that are speaking today and moving the needle on their work. And so for me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Benjamin J. Van is my name. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can look up our organization at impact-ventures.co, not .com. We are looking for impact investors. We actually have a cohort that is launching November 3rd, so next week. Actually, this weekend is our orientation. We have an alumni group of 25 founders that are all rock stars and doing work across the country. So if you're looking for a diversified portfolio or deal flow or investment opportunities, our cohort has a great group of founders that are ready to speak with investors, customers, et cetera. So I got to shout them out in the work that they're doing as well. So.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And so,
Thank you, Tracy.
in closing, I'll just say, I invite everyone to challenge the status quo. Just because just because things have always been done a certain way doesn't mean that they need to continue to be done a certain way. And so we invite you all to take some of the ideas that you've heard here and whatever else you may be seeing in the field, and be bold and to take those risks. And also you can find me on LinkedIn at Tracy Jarman. And also Cappy Q is working on a national effort called the Path to 1555, which is a collaborative initiative designed to grow Black businesses and their communities based on research that shows that if 15% of Black-owned businesses could hire at least one more employee, then the American economy could grow by $55 billion. And so we're looking for people of all sectors who are willing to align their efforts, to share their data, to share their stories about what's working and what's not, and to lift up stories of these Black entrepreneurs and to change the narrative because this is really important, and now is the time to make a difference and to make sure that capital gets to the hands of those who can utilize it. So with that, thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, Ben.